The head of the Charity Commission says she is horrified about reports of groping and harassment at an event for men only in central London. The President's Club dinner brought together leading figures from the worlds of finance, entertainment and politics to raise money for dozens of charities.
Among them was the Conservative Minister Nadhim Zahawi, who is said to have been given a dressing down by the party's chief whip and asked to explain his attendance. The Commission now says it will investigate whether crimes were committed at the event. Well, let's talk to our political correspondent, Laura Bundock, who's in Westminster for us. Widespread condemnation, Laura. What happens now?
A couple of things are going to be going on at the moment. Nadhim Zahawi himself, a lot of focus on him, big questions about what he was doing there. Why was he there in the first place? It's not the first time we're told he went to this event. He was also there in 2010, it's reported. He's, of course, newly promoted to his job as Children and Families Minister. And although he said he arrived at 8 o'clock in the evening, left at 9:30 because he felt uncomfortable, he said he didn't see some of the things that were reported in the newspapers having taken place. There are questions about his presence there at all. Theresa May earlier on today said that progress had been made looking at all these issues, but more needed to be done. Maria Miller, chair of the Equality Select Committee, pretty much reinforcing the idea that perhaps Nadhim Zahawi himself has a few more questions to answer. The Charities Commission have responded to the letter written by Jo Swinson that had been co-signed by over 40 MPs. They have basically said they want an urgent meeting with the President's Club Trust. They've also, interestingly, at the end of the letter said there have been no previous complaints about either the charity or this particular event. It's probably unlikely Nadhim Zahawi himself is going to lose his job over this. I'm sure he'll have been given a big dressing down when he had to see the chief whip yesterday. We may well hear from him a little later on today. But there is another issue here, looking at the legislation and whether or not things need to be tightened. We're told that hostesses had to sign gagging orders, a non-disclosure agreement. Perhaps those sorts of laws could be changed, which means that they wouldn't have to be honoured if hostesses or people felt that they had been the victim of abuse. And then there's a bigger change, perhaps the Equalities Act, that might mean that employers themselves could be liable if their employees are victims of abuse or have allegations to make about their customers. And certainly that will be another area I'm looking at the moment. But Nadhim Zahawi, watch out, because we may well hear from him later on today.
To look at people like Nadhim Zahawi, who may have been at a dinner where things happened that are culturally unacceptable but happen when large groups of men are drunk and misogynistic. The worst, that actually it is as dangerous to be it is as toxic to be a bystander and to do nothing sometimes than it is to be a perpetrator, because there are always, the people who make change happen are the men in these situations who see their friends treating women badly and who don't stand up or who do.
That is wrong.
Yes.
Not one man has come out and said, actually, I did see that happen and I feel guilty for not speaking up.
And I think that is a much more appropriate thing to do, and I think we should be calling on people who are at that dinner to say that and to show real change. But I don't think that, particularly when it comes to political scandals, this always becomes a hunt for the opposing political party to try and claim a scalp for their own purposes, and that doesn't actually help women.
The Prime Minister has condemned the men-only charity dinner where there were allegations of hostesses being groped and harassed. Theresa May says the event was appalling and objectified women. Downing Street's reprimanded the government minister Nadhim Zahawi, who said he attended the President's Club fundraiser but left early because he felt uncomfortable. Richard Galpin has the latest.
Today, the repercussions for those who attended the scandal-ridden dinner continue.
Mr Zahawi, could you give us a comment on why you attended the dinner?
This is Nadhim Zahawi, Minister for Children and Families. He says he left early because he felt uncomfortable and has condemned what he described as the horrific events reported by the Financial Times.
Mr Zahawi, are you going to lose your job?
And now the BBC has testimony that the alleged sexual harassment of women working as hostesses at the event last week was not something new. We spoke to a woman who worked at the event 4 years ago with her sister.
We were made to line up in 2 lines heading onto the stage, and we walked out basically like pieces of meat really onto the stage. My sister met this older gentleman who had a daughter around her age, so she felt really safe with him. but later on in the evening, after a few drinks, he grabbed his hand round her waist and leant in for a kiss. And at that point, I witnessed it and went over and decided it was time to go.
Some of the men who say they were attending the charity event for the first time have also been speaking out. A leading businessman, Rami Ranger, who was invited by a friend but left early, said there had been a warning about inappropriate behaviour.
The presenter did make an announcement that you have got young girls coming to look after you, but make sure you remember that they are somebody's daughters and sisters, so don't misbehave.
This morning at the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, there was further condemnation of what happened at the President's Club dinner from the Prime Minister.
When I read the report of that event that took place, frankly, I was appalled. I thought that sort of approach to women, that objectification of women, was something that we were leaving behind. We've made progress, but it's very clear that there is a lot more for us to do.
Although the President's Club has now been disbanded, there are still many questions to be answered, not least whether what happened here is also happening at other men-only events and venues. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
Our top story, the Education Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, is reprimanded by Downing Street for going to the scandal-hit President's Club charity dinner as questions continue to be raised about the event.
There's a much bigger thing here, which is that we should get away from the sorts of events where men and women are treated very differently.
Our top story today then, the Education Minister Nadhim Zahawi has been reprimanded by Number 10 for attending that men-only charity dinner. Mr Zahawi attended the President Club's function at the Dorchester Hotel, where women employed as hostesses say they were groped. The minister said he felt uncomfortable and left the event early. Alexandra Mackenzie reports.
The annual President's Club charity dinner for men only at the Dorchester Hotel. Women were hired as table hostesses. There are claims they were groped. They were made to wear revealing outfits and specific underwear, and their phones were confiscated. Madison Marriage is the Financial Times journalist who went undercover to expose the dinner.
Multiple women told me that they had been touched inappropriately, and that ranged from holding their hands to touching their stomachs to hands near the bottom of their back, things which maybe you might not find too offensive, but then touching their bums, touching kind of grabbing them, pulling them into their laps.
One of the event organisers, David Mellor, resigned his position as a member of the Department for Education's board, and summoned to explain his attendance was Education Minister Nadhim Zahawi. He was called in to see the Chief Whip. On social media, Mr Zahawi said, "I do unequivocally condemn this behaviour. The report is truly shocking. I will never attend a men-only function ever."
He didn't stay long. He went home very shortly after the hostesses were announced by the presenter and paraded around the room. I think that indicates to me that he was shocked by the events, didn't like the culture, the atmosphere, and left.
The President's Club, which said it was appalled by the allegations surrounding the event last week, said it will distribute remaining funds to children's charities before shutting down in the wake of the scandal. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News.
Right, some comments from you about the Families Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, who we were reporting this morning has been reprimanded by Number 10 for going to that men-only charity dinner where hostesses say they were groped and propositioned. Stevie says, "I see Nadhim Zahawi keeps his job after going to the grope party." Yet another politician keeping their job after doing things others will be sacked and fined for. This tweet from Grudge. So after 33 years of fundraising, the gala hostesses speak out now. Scott, this event's been going on for years. The hostesses knew what to expect and what happens there. Where are the hundreds of complaints from them? And Paul says, other than the journalists who went undercover, Financial Times journalists they were, can we hear from other hostesses about their experiences? That's what we're hoping to bring you today, Paul, so do stay tuned. And more fallout from the men-only charity gala where hostesses say they were harassed and groped. by some of those who were there. Brian has emailed on this. Well done, media. Brian has emailed on this. Well done, media. Well done, the reporter at the FT, for depriving much-needed money for Great Ormond Street Hospital. Over £500,000 now lost and staying in people's pockets who will not miss it. These charity events have been happening for many years. They paid a good wage for beautiful young women, brackets professionals, to help with the entertainment. And as a result, the event is always a success. These women are not complaining. These women are not making official complaints and also do not complain when they attend women-only nights, which are also a great way to support charities. Westminster, and in particular, she must have raised her eyebrows at the fact that one of her ministers, recently promoted actually to ministerial level, was there.
Yeah, this is Nadhim Zahawi, who is the children's minister. He went to this event, and as a result of that, he was hauled in yesterday by the chief whip and reminded of his responsibilities, and is now, I imagine, a thoroughly chastened man. He says that he went there, he was uncomfortable with what was going on and left early. So he left about 9:30, so before perhaps things got even more out of hand. I don't think there's any question of him being sacked or removed from his post. There doesn't seem to be any suggestion that that might happen. But I imagine for many MPs, many ministers, it has been a sort of wake-up call to think about the sort of events they accept invitations to. And Nadhim Zahawi, when he emerged from his house this morning, he was keeping his counsel. Just have a look.
Mr Zahawi, why did you attend the male-only dinner?
So, no words from Mr Zahawi this morning. I mean, one of the things that now is being looked at, Vic, is whether anything can be done to try and ensure such sort of events just cannot happen again. And there have been all sorts of demands, for example, the Equalities Act to be toughened up, to be given real teeth. There have been suggestions that Charities Commission should be more focused on just seeing what different fundraising events are actually like and whether they should be able to claim that they are charities. I think the difficulty is there are actually laws already in place. I was having a look at the Equalities Act, and that already says, for example, that it's an offence to engage in degrading or humiliating behaviour, to violate someone's dignity, sexual harassment. So those are already offences. There are also criminal offences of indecent assault, sexual assault. So the offences are already there. It's more, I think, about trying to change the culture. All the more so because of the recent scandals we've had at Westminster. And that, I think, was what the minister this morning, when he was talking about it, Matthew Hancock, was driving at. That has to be the real consequence of the publicity surrounding the President's Club.
I understand that Mr Zahawi was invited because it was a charity event and left early because he was uncomfortable with it. So that's what I understand. I understand he's spoken to the chief whip, but there's a much bigger thing here, which is that we should get away from the sorts of events where men and women are treated very differently, and that there are reports of some pretty terrible behaviour.
Interesting too, I thought, how Mrs May's language during the day yesterday toughened up as the sort of scale of outrage built. Initially, number 10 saying she was uncomfortable by what she'd read in the paper. By the end of the day, saying she was appalled, and of course calling for Nadhim Zahawi to be hauled in. So I think she gradually realised just the nature of outrage, not just at Westminster, but more broadly, about what had gone on at the President's Club.
The political fallout continues from the President's Club charity dinner, which was marred by allegations of sexual harassment. There is growing pressure on the Families Minister, Nadhim Zahawi, who is said to have been given a dressing down by the Conservative Chief Whip and asked to explain his attendance at the dinner. Well, with me is our senior political correspondent, Beth Rigby. Put it bluntly, how much pressure is there on Mr Zahawi to step down as a minister?
There is some pressure on him because he attended this dinner. He says that he left early because he was uncomfortable with these women being paraded out to this group of...
Because that's how they started it.
Yeah, the women come out and all the men are just sitting there. He said he left. I mean, look, there are questions because he's been before, so there's questions about whether he should attend an all-male dinner. He knew it was an all-male dinner. He said he was uncomfortable. He's apologised. He's been given a dressing down by the Chief Whip. And I did speak to one MP yesterday, a female MP, who did point out to me that should he lose his job for turning up at a dinner that was probably ill-advised to turning up to and then clearing off. And she also made the point that he was probably invited by David Mellor, who was the co-chair of the President's Club, who was, until yesterday, a non-executive director at the Department of Education. It might be that Nadhim Zahawi, as a junior minister, had been invited by this man and he'd gone along and left. So do I think it's a sack offence? Do I think he's going to lose his job over it? Probably not.
I mean, unfortunate, though, that his particular portfolio is families.
It is unfortunate, but people can make mistakes, and he says he left. I think it would help his cause if he maybe came out and actually made a statement, because obviously he's disappeared from view. He hasn't been on the front bench. I think behind the scenes, lots of his colleagues will be telling him just to dig in and hoping it will blow over. There's also been some criticism about how the Prime Minister's handled it, actually, because this is obviously a shocking story. It has dismayed, is an understatement, many women in politics, many men in politics. And she came out yesterday and said she was uncomfortable by the reports in the Financial Times of this dinner and what happened to those female hostesses. That was upgraded last night by a number 10 source to say she was appalled, but a sense maybe that she'd been a bit flat-footed. Other ministers, such as Margot James, came out very strongly. And then where does it go from here? Well, Margot James, on Newsnight last night, hinted that there might be changes to the law to prevent women from signing gagging orders so they can't report sexual harassment. There is a piece of policy that the Prime Minister could actually implement if she chose to, but this again was an example where she could have maybe come out guns blazing, but she was, as ever, a bit cautious and a bit leaden.
Beth, thank you very much indeed.
Angela, there is a school of thought this morning, just reading through some of the papers, some of the opinion pieces, that actually we shouldn't be surprised when men get together, this kind of behaviour does happen. Not all men partake in that behaviour, but a minority do, and it's a pack mentality when men get together.
Well, the thing is that I would say right from the start is that the only people that are to blame for attacks on women, for groping women, for sexually objectifying women or harassing them are the men. 100%. That's unequivocal. I think we're all agreed on that men are to blame. If they can't keep their hands to themselves, it doesn't matter what the situation is, what women are wearing, where they are to blame for that. However, I think what we've not really touched upon in this debate are the women who were protesting at this behaviour. Now, they are not to blame for what the men did, but come on, when you work as a hostess at a men-only dinner where there's loads of booze and they're alleged to have had to wear skimpy dresses and matching knickers and heels, they are they're raising their level of vulnerability. The man is to blame for touching her without her invitation, but if these women didn't like what they were going on. I know we often talk about empowerment and women don't feel they can protest. They were doing a job of work. Why didn't they just walk off the job?
Well, hang on a second, Angela. There is a suggestion that these women had to... Angela, there is a suggestion that these women had to sign non-disclosure agreements, so they couldn't speak up for themselves after the event.
Well, I mean, I think the facts of the case are still sort of coming together like a mosaic. So let's go a bit further upstream before they actually took the job on. If they knew they were going into a situation where they had to dress this way, they were going to be in a gentleman's only environment, as I keep reiterating before anybody sort of lampoons me for this, the men are to blame for not keeping their hands to themselves. But I sort of compare it a little bit to when you leave your back door open and you go out. It's your house. You are entitled 100% to leave your house any which way you want. But if you get broken into, the problem was that you left the back door open and there was a greater chance of somebody burgling your house than the house next door.
Let's bring Jane in on this.
And while we have to
let's bring Jane in on this. You know, Angela's asserting there that, of course, the men who were alleged to have harassed these women were to blame, but also the women put themselves in that situation. They knew the nature of the job, and while they didn't invite it, they knew it was a possibility.
No, I mean, we've heard from hostesses, people in the hostesses industry over the last 24 hours who've said that this was a notorious dinner and that they do hostessing work all the time and they don't get groped. And actually, they weren't, Angela says that they could have left. They weren't allowed to leave. They were herded back from the toilets if they'd spent too long in the toilets.
But why take that job in the first place if it is notorious? This club has been running for years, so it is notorious on the circuit.
Sure, I think some of them didn't realise how bad it would be. I think that they would think that, you know, they'd done jobs similar to this and it wouldn't actually be that bad. I think, you know, I think we need to listen to the women themselves and to sort of hear what they have said about how uncomfortable they felt about being groped. And nobody should be expected to be groped. You know, if you're a hostess, that being groped is not part of the job. That is completely unacceptable. And they couldn't have left halfway through. And I think just sort of obviously wearing a short dress should have sent alarm bells ringing. But I think at that stage, they weren't allowed to change. They weren't allowed to. They were given the dresses, according to the FT journalist.
OK. Well, Angela,
as they were going into the thing.
OK, Angela, I just want to move it on a bit. How careful should we be about overreaction here? This has shone a spotlight on something that has been happening in the city at fundraising events for years. You know, the club has shut down. You know, they've drawn a line under it. But we're talking here about charities losing out on over £1 million. We're talking about a government minister who could lose his job just by being there without even having done anything wrong. And this is just the actions of a small percentage of men.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I don't wish to demean in any way those women who were subjected to very uncomfortable and distressing behaviour. Those men were to blame for that. However, first of all, for a charity to lose out £500,000, why are we holding a really desperately in need charity to ransom because of the stupid, unreconstructed, terrible actions of a handful of men? Call the men to order. It's not blood money, it's not dirty money in that respect. The charity needs the money, and noble gestures are all well and good, but meanwhile let's look on the shop floor and see what the likes of Great Ormond Street could have done with £500,000. Overreaction is a very kind of inflammatory term, because who decides where the parameters lie? Who decides whether something is acceptable or not? I think that where we talk about empowerment of women are concerned, if you want to throw the debate wide open, ask women why they want to take up jobs as hostesses in all male dinners and dining clubs in the first place. I mean, for goodness sake, of course it's not in the job description that they're obliged to be groped, but why are we still having dinners where women sort of mooch around like tootsies serving men? I mean, that's why there is so much hypocrisy in this debate, and that's why it sticks in the throat a bit when we talk about it's all about the men here and not the women. OK,
Angela Epstein and Jane Merrick, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but this debate is going to rumble on throughout the day here on Sky News, so keep your views coming into us.